Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, and today we're on the show Visiting the Inner World. As you can see, today I haven't come to you alone. I've brought a platypus with me. This platypus will symbolize a bad person. Let's delve deeper into this topic. Why do we even need these so-called bad people? I think many of you have encountered this in childhood, or you've read about it, or perhaps your own children are experiencing it now. At school, this happens when a group targets a particular child for bullying. It's as if there's a scapegoat in the class and the children band together against them. We'll gather some similar examples now and then we'll analyze them together. A similar situation can arise within a family as well, especially when there are several children and one child seems to take on the role of the scapegoat. That is, they're not exactly seen as the embodiment of evil, but as somehow less worthy. Parents, too, may treat one child this way overall. The same thing can happen when one of the spouses in a family takes on the role of the scapegoat. A mother and her children may unite against the father, considering him not spiritual enough, not sensitive enough, in general, not the right kind of person. It can also be the other way around, when the mother is seen as somehow repulsive, someone merely tolerated. Then this situation is mirrored. And now, as the child grows up, they make their parents into scapegoats, almost as if they are truly embodiments of pure evil. And now, for the innocent child, the parents unfortunately take on the significant role of the bad person. Sometimes an entire nation becomes the bad one. For example, in many dictatorships, there always exists another nation that plays the crucial role of this bad person or external enemy. In this strategic way, the state effectively redirects all the potential dissatisfaction that could have been directly aimed at the government, especially when people genuinely start to wonder what exactly is wrong, into the easily identifiable image of an external enemy. But why does a person need this bad person at all? I think each of you has something to recall on this topic, whether it's about children bullying one child or about relationships within a family. The same thing can happen at work or even within a group of friends, when someone is considered worse than everyone else and is merely tolerated. They get teased and so on. The profound and undeniable need for this bad person, and I genuinely do perceive it as a fundamental and inherent need, is in essence a universal and pervasive requirement. A need to torment someone as if a person cannot do without it. Someone who, in their mind, will be considered bad. If I don't have someone whom I torment, whom I consider bad, it's as if I won't have a dedicated and personal container, a special receptacle or vessel in which I can keep something that is truly and uniquely my own, something precious that belongs solely to me. And if you look at life from its very beginning to its ultimate end, you can always find this bad person. That is to say, the specific people involved may indeed change over time. But this storyline seems to run continuously throughout. And if you take away this bad person, if you absolutely don't allow the psyche to create this particular image at all, then the individual begins to profoundly torment themselves internally. In other words, this need to torment exists. And if you don't give it anything, it starts to gnaw at its own owner. It's like when you have a pet, a dog, and it has a toy it chews on, or a bone, or a cat has something similar too. There's a mouse or a toy that the cat catches and kicks with its hind legs. For humans, everything is much more complicated. A person needs to demonize this very bad figure. And if this image is demonized, all restrictions are lifted from the personality. Everything I say about bad people, the way I insult them, the way I verbally humiliate them, all of this is not permitted in relation to good people. If I were to do this, to good people, I would feel like a monster. But when all of this hatred is directed at a bad person, I do not experience myself as a monster. In other words, by demonizing someone, I free myself from the suspicion that maybe I am the demon. When a child appears in the class who becomes the target of bullying, it always happens because they have been caught by the hook of their own vulnerability. It could be excess weight, a troubled family, or maybe they did something. And children intuitively single them out as a separate character. And against the backdrop of this character, even those who were worse off start to feel a bit better about themselves. In other words, as people like to say, I'm not perfect, of course, but at least I'm not like that. So the presence of a bad person, it instantly boosts self-esteem. We let our inner beast out for a walk. We are allowed to do what is usually forbidden, as long as this person is labeled as bad. And beyond that, I also assert myself. Those children who were rather frail, weak, and unnoticed, the moment a scapegoat appears, they feel it. This is their moment in the spotlight. And people do the same thing on social media. When a blogger says something wrong, slips up, or says something politically incorrect, they pounce as a pack. People attack and start to tear them apart. We also constantly torment someone in our own minds, replaying that image over and over. And in our minds, we can do anything we want to that person. Absolutely anything. We have no limits, and it feels as if no one will ever find out about it. And we don't have to answer to anyone for what we do to that person or for what we say to them. Sometimes people hide behind pseudonyms just to let their true selves out. This urge to torment others is a mechanism that comes from the distant past. That is, even an embryo that is just beginning to form goes through all the stages of mammalian evolution. At first, the human embryo resembles an amphibian, then a mammal, and only later does it look like a human. And when a child is born, they still carry something from those earlier stages of evolution. People say, this is it. This is called an atavism, meaning that somehow the development of the fetus did not follow the human line. And this inner animal, this is something we specifically study at the School of Humanity. Right now, the beast, this object or process within the personality, is often quite elusive. Many people do not even realize that they are feeling angry at a particular moment, that they are tormenting someone else, or that they are being cruel and unkind. And the inability to recognize this aspect prevents a person from effectively addressing their own internal self-aggression. That is to say, those particular people who, that is, those people who have excessive autoaggression, are not those who simply cannot give up the desire to torment. It is like children in a classroom who assert themselves at the expense of some outcast. It is the same mechanism as a personality asserting itself through its ideal self over its real self. So it turns out that my real self is despised by me as if it were a collection of everything bad. Like this platypus, you can look at it as adorable, or on the other hand, you can see it as somewhat repulsive. The hardest part of this process is admitting that it brings pleasure. That's why people can't stop this process within themselves, this desire to torment. You've probably seen films or heard stories where a maniac captures a victim, locks them in a basement, and asserts himself through them. That is to say, until I have someone in the basement, I truly and deeply experience my own personal sense of profound inadequacy and my own significant deficiency. But as soon as I have someone who is completely under my control, it's as if I compensate for my inadequacy. You can observe this phenomenon even in very small, everyday things, for example. When two spouses are constantly in these kinds of relationships, it's like the maniac who has caught a victim and then they switch places. This sense of complete possession, total power, and the ability to torment someone so that they can't leave, this stirs something inside. This is all part of our animal nature. The very moment I truly find a truly bad person, and the more truly disgusting and abhorrent things I discover within their character, the higher and more significantly I rise in my own estimation, the pedestal of my superiority. That is, when a person doesn't evolve, doesn't become wiser, but constantly lives with this image of these scapegoats or bad people, thanks to whom I always feel better about myself. If you truly listen to what people often talk about with each other, you can frequently hear a lot of deep dissatisfaction. With someone or something, there is often a palpable sense of discontent. A lot of talk about shortcomings, about something lacking. This is the easiest topic, especially when there's a mutual acquaintance, and that person is discussed as the scapegoat. And sometimes in a group, someone steps out of the room, and immediately, as soon as they're gone, they become the scapegoat. You could just leave this mechanism as it is and say, well, it's understandable, it's beastly, we need someone to tear apart. All right, you've explained everything to me. Now I understand why I need an inner or outer platypus. I'll just keep living this way. But the problem is, once you let this beast out from inside, it's quite difficult to put it back inside. This kind of hysteria, which is fueled in dictatorships around the idea of a bad nation, it then seems to be passed down from generation to generation. Children who have tasted this poisonous drink, those who had a designated scapegoat within their class, will certainly not forget this pleasure. They will absolutely not forget the powerful sense of complete wholeness they felt when they bullied someone else. It's the same within a family. When it happens that a family is used to treating one of the children as a scapegoat, then these children grow up and repeat the same thing in their own families. In the same way, having already tasted this drug, they begin to repeat the same scenario, making one of their children or another family member into a scapegoat. There is a lot of pleasure in this. It comes from the animal part of us. And in this, there is a sense of dominance and power. That is, a person having an internal platypus definitely reduces the number of complaints they have about themselves. If I have a habit of thinking badly, if I already have the experience of tasting this blood, of tormenting this victim, then I will torment myself in exactly the same way. And the only way not to torment myself is to torment someone else. Besides that, there is a lot of pleasure in this because I stop being constrained by moral boundaries. For example, when usually with an ordinary person, I am not allowed to do this, as it were. I feel a sense of limitation. Or, for example, I am talking to someone and that person does not want to devalue another, and they say, I don't want to make disparaging remarks. It's as if I've been burned, as if I wanted to drink that blood, to assert myself at someone else's expense. And at that moment, I realized that this is immoral. But no one can see the torment in my mind to stop it. And in our minds, like a beast unleashed from its leash, we can twist and distort this image in any way we want, and it's as if we simply can't stop. We torment, 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 and we can't stop. This is complete freedom and a lack of restraint, in a human sense. Besides that, in the torment of something bad, we feel 100% justified. When a person feels completely right, they feel perfect. In other words, there is no self-doubt. This is the image of a kind of deity. So, tormenting another gives a false sense of one's own righteousness. As I mentioned, self-esteem rises instantly, just as they say, don't dig a pit for someone else. And here, digging this very pit creates an illusion that you are standing on a mountain. In reality, you are on the ground. It's just that someone else has been put into that pit. In addition, a person needs to explain their outbursts of rage, their flashes of cruelty. And it's as if he constantly has to weave a narrative, constantly manipulate facts in such a way as to have someone to hate. Because these outbursts of rage exist, but if you have a compelling story about how someone else is bad, then you can legitimize them without losing your own sense of goodness. In other words, the worldview is constantly being altered, and I am constantly looking for something to pick at in order to let the beast out in words, in thoughts, or in actions, as if unconsciously. I am waiting for a moment of vulnerability, for the other to step back, for some mistake, and then my moment comes. In addition to this, the person who torments the bad one perceives them as a tormentor. It's like in the film To Kill a Dragon. While hunting the dragon, trying to kill it, a person without realizing it becomes the dragon themselves. In other words, this feeling that I am dressed in white, that I am an avenging angel, a great martyr, completely distorts reality. That is, a person seems to be indignant, seems to be looking for an official reason to be outraged, but the essence is the satisfaction of this animalistic hunger. What is the significant harm in truly having something detrimental actually inside? When a nation goes through war and the beast is unleashed, it will be difficult to catch it again. And this cruelty will increase in everything, in interactions with loved ones, in one's attitude toward oneself. And this beast, which has become accustomed to lapping up this warm, fresh crimson blood, does not allow the personality to evolve. That is, by feeding the previous stages of development, we will, without noticing it, begin to regress in all areas. In business, in earnings, intellectually, and so on. In other words, a kind of brutalization occurs, with all the consequences that follow from it. In addition, this easy way of boosting self-esteem does not create in a person the desire to seek self-esteem through more difficult means. Why should I strive for self-fulfillment if I can devalue someone who has already achieved it? Why do I need achievements if I can simply declare someone else's achievements worthless? And so the person gets used to this fast food, quick and easily accessible, and there is no point for her to make an effort to strive for something herself. Because this method is just too close at hand. And there is simply too much pleasure in it. In this way, a person loses their sense of purpose in life. And when you try to talk to such a person to get them to reflect, all they can do is express indignation, criticize, devalue, and point out flaws. In other words, thinking becomes completely blocked and all thought turns into a kind of shredder. It cuts the substance of existence into meaningless pieces. That is to say, person begins to see the world with different eyes. They look at everything as a search for the negative, which brings them all the aforementioned benefits. In addition to this, everything that befalls bad people will befall the person themselves. It affects both loved ones and the person themselves, because once this mechanism is set in motion, it is very difficult to stop. And the person begins to unconsciously fear themselves. That is, when you are afraid of ending up in the crosshairs. And when you are afraid to call yourself a bad person, you can't admit to your own shortcomings or start something new, because in that moment you feel vulnerable. In other words, a person begins to live cautiously, always looking over their shoulder at this regime that watches them and is ready to pounce at any moment. This is difficult to accept, the fact that we are most afraid of ourselves when we are in the crosshairs, and just a little more if we are seen as wearing the clothes of a bad person, then the beast will break loose. At the command attack, it will begin to tear us apart. And because of this, we don't move toward realization, because just as we are about to take that step, lying in wait is a well-trained instinct, ready to seize the moment a violation occurs. In addition, the psyche becomes unstable, meaning that steadiness disappears. The culture of how we speak about others declines. A person becomes rather loose in their judgments. And along with these judgments, emotions intensify. In other words, this shakes the psyche as a whole. And a person cannot approach their own dark sides. That is, it's as if he constantly has to lie to himself because he is afraid of this mechanism. Please write if you have anything further to add to this video regarding the truly vital necessity of certain inherent negative traits that allow us to hunt effectively without strict moral principles and give us the crucial opportunity to assert ourselves. I will say goodbye to you now. See you next time.